So this is going to be one of my most daring and possibly foolish videos yet. I am actually directly going against advice that I got from previous lawyers about not talking about what happened behind the scenes in private conversations with Lola when we were living together. And I want to be clear that, in my opinion, those conversations really are nobody's business. I shouldn't have to divulge any of this, and it should be very clear that Lola lied through her teeth and is an unreliable witness based on evidence that I've already presented. And none of this is stuff that Scrabble Association should be adjudicating at all, or any good reason for keeping me out of Scrabble tournaments. But I feel like I want to talk about it from a sort of psychic point of view anyway, just because I do think it's important to understand what's happening at a psychological level, not just with me and Lola, but with many of the other people in the Scrabble community and how they've reacted to these stories and why it has led to me getting in this bad position I am of these people hating my guts and doing everything they can to keep me out of playing Scrabble. But I don't actually want to just talk about the stuff with Lola. I do want to talk about the stuff with Darrell Day as well, but I also want to talk about the stories of two other celebrity male actors who I actually have a lot of empathy for and feel like, having learned about their stories in the last few years, they're things that really spoke a lot to my heart and got me to think about the relevance of their stories to my own and the relationships between these. And those particular actors are Jim Carrey and Liam Neeson. And I'm going to talk about why I'm interested in them and what the particular story in their lives are that I think is related to all of this. But before I get into those details, I just want to share a couple of quotes from one of these actors that is something that I wrote down when I first heard it and was very inspirational to me. And I will include the full text of these quotations in the description of the video. And the first one is, "There are some moments in life when you have to stand up and defend your honor against the evil in the world." And the person who said this is Jim Carrey. And to me, that is a really telling quote. And once I tell you the story about Jim Carrey's life, I think you'll understand a little more where he's coming from on that. But I think you can also understand why this quote interests me so much, because I do feel like what has happened to me, the wrongful treatment I've gotten from a number of people in the Scrabble world, is literally evil. And this is something that I had a moral compulsion to speak up about and do something about. But there's another quote also from Jim Carrey that I think speaks more about the other side, the people who were influenced by the people who did really evil things. And this quote is, "I have discovered the depth of deception behind those false claims, the kind of deception decent people fall for, because to us, such behavior is unimaginable." Again, that is Jim Carrey saying that. And you might think, what was he actually talking about that caused him to make these really kind of deep and powerful quotes about the ways in which he was wronged? And I want to be clear too, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about this story about Jim Carrey and also one about Liam Neeson that there has been some press coverage of. You will see some things on Wikipedia, for instance, about this stuff. But there are also stories that are not fully in the public eye, that the amount of press coverage of them has been limited, and there's a lot of sort of guesswork and surmising about what's actually happened here. And I want to keep that in mind, that everything we think we know about these celebrity lives is something that has been filtered through other sources, through third parties, through journalists, through other people's impressions. And I think we should always keep in mind that whatever we think we know about these people and their lives is not perfect information. But I do think that there's enough interesting information and insight in this that it's worth talking about here. I also want to say that I did read these stories about Jim Carrey and Liam Neeson a while ago, but I glanced over a few articles very quickly before recording this video to refresh my memory. But this is not something that's really at the forefront of my mind that I've been researching recently. It was a number of years ago I read this stuff. And the same is also going to be true of some of the stuff I talk about with Lola. So given that all of this stuff is stuff I'm talking about that I did know more about a few years ago and my memory may not be perfect and fresh, I might make some small errors of fact in reporting this, which are just memory errors. But if I do find out that I said anything inaccurate, I will, in the comments of this video, make corrections later to correct the record. My point is that if I do make any misstatements of fact here, it is simply through a lack of memory or a lack of understanding of the true facts, not through any intentional deception here. I'm going to do my best to tell things as I remember it, but it's possible I might be remembering a few things wrong. But the gist of the Jim Carrey story is that he actually had a romantic relationship with an Irish woman who I think was about 20 years his junior. I think it happened when he was in his 50s and she was in her 30s or something like that. And she was actually a makeup artist on a movie set that he was involved in. That's how they first met and crossed paths. And they had a very serious relationship over a number of years. And it was the case that there were times where things were going very well between them, but there were also times when things did not go so well, and that she and her family actually tried to bring a lawsuit against Jim Carrey, and they were alleging some pretty insulting things about Jim Carrey that would not have looked good in the public eye. In particular, I think that he might have given her venereal disease and some other things like that. And it's one of these things where I think Jim Carrey and his lawyers decided, that even though they believed this woman was lying or her family were lying to be out to get a quick buck, it was just going to be bad enough press for him if this stuff got out there. And he actually did settle out of court with them in order not to get the bad press from this stuff happening. So in a way, you could say that this family successfully blackmailed Jim Carrey to get some money out of him. But a funny thing happened is that despite that, Jim Carrey and the woman later reconciled, and they actually ended up having a good relationship and getting back together for a while after that. But this woman, I think she was still pretty young, maybe she's not even 40 years old yet, she did commit suicide a few years later. And even at the time that she committed suicide, Jim Carrey was still on good enough terms with her and her family that he was actually a pallbearer at her funeral. But a big part of what happened after that is that her mother and maybe some other people in her family ended up trying to take Jim Carrey back to court and claiming some sort of wrongful death thing on his part, and saying that the ways he had treated her, the bad things he had done, had actually contributed to this woman's early suicide. And this was where Jim Carrey put his foot down. And he felt that he already had not been guilty before when they tried to extort money from him, but was willing to just settle out of court for the expediency of not having this stuff tarnish his public image. But at this point, he was like, no, I did nothing wrong the first time, I did nothing wrong this time, and I am standing up against this. I am not going to let these people push me around and extort me for money a second time. And in fact, part of what Jim Carrey claimed is that the woman's suicide was actually quite possibly influenced more by her mother than by Jim Carrey. That her mother had an abusive relationship with her that really was bad, and that in the short time before she killed herself, she had actually said some things to him about certain text messages, certain communications she had with her mother had gotten her to a very angry and upset place. And again, I don't know the full story. I only know the bits and pieces that I've heard of it here. But my general take on the situation, I believe Jim Carrey probably was telling the truth. And it sounds like this mother was not the best person herself, and was probably somebody who, did treat her daughter badly in some ways and maybe did contribute to her daughter killing herself. But also, like so many bad people, she puts her own bad behavior on other people. She blames them for the things that she does. So, she drove her daughter to suicide possibly? Well, guess what? I'm going to blame Jim Carrey for doing the exact bad things that I did because he's got a lot of money and I can extort money from him. And that's what she tried to do. But she did not succeed. Jim Carrey ultimately did fight all this stuff off, and that is how this stuff became producing of those quotes for Jim Carrey, how he decided to speak up about how absolutely evil he felt these people's behavior was, and how it was just an absolute moral imperative for him to speak up, even though he had more than enough money to make this stuff go away by settling out of court in all these ways if he really needed to. So I like this story, and I think it reflects well on Jim Carrey. But there's another story, too, that I also want to talk about. And it's about Liam Neeson, and it's a pretty interesting one. So Liam Neeson, of course, didn't always have this kind of reputation and role, but ever since the movie Taken, he's become sort of an action hero stud who was in a bunch of movies about him getting revenge on people, going out and rescuing his daughter, that kind of thing. And he was actually making a movie in 2019 that had this kind of theme of revenge in it. And he gave a particular interview to a particular magazine or newspaper. I think it was The Independent. And he was talking about actually a real-life incident in his life that happened much earlier that I guess was something that was sort of on his mind or influenced him in playing the role of this particular character. Now, I want to keep in mind that at the time that Liam Neeson is giving this interview, he's in his 60s, and he's actually talking about something that was roughly 40 years earlier, back when he was in his 20s. But he gave a very sort of honest description of this event from younger in his life, when he was in his 20s, about how a woman who was in his family, someone who was very close to him, he had a close relationship with, had been raped by a black man. And Liam Neeson was admitting to himself that at that time, the particular experience that she had led to a lot of racism in him, a lot of anger specifically against black men in general, because of the way this one particular black man had wronged him and a person that he loved. And he was, at that younger time in his life, so sort of angry and hell-bent on revenge that apparently there was a period of a week or so where he was literally walking around angrily through town, carrying, as he called it, a kosh, which is like a blackjack, a weapon, like a club, kind of something like a nightstick, it might be called in the U.S., and literally just sort of looking for a fight, sort of huffing and puffing on the street, walking around and seeing if he could find a black man to start something with, or hoping that a black man would start something with him, and thinking in his head that he might kill some random black man on the street out of his anger, out of his desire for revenge. Now, it never actually happened. He never actually did cross paths with a black man and any violence resulted. And even if he did, who knows that it actually would have resulted in violence. Maybe he would have come to his senses in that moment. But he was giving a very sort of excoriatingly honest telling of a story from 40 years early in his life when he was that consumed by anger and revenge. And when he was sort of admitting his own racism against black men at that time. And it's interesting because part of what happened is that one could argue that I think that Liam Neeson telling the story was not actually doing anything wrong. He was doing a very sort of honest and earnest self-analysis. But this is maybe the kind of story you should be telling to a therapist and not to a journalist. And it is the case that after he told this story, it kind of freaked the journalist out, and I think that journalist and other people in the journalism world started speaking up, and there was sort of a wave of anger toward Liam Neeson, painting him as a racist, as somebody who would harm or kill black people, these kind of things. And it became this sort of sentiment of the moment. I don't think in the end it really destroyed his career, did too much damage, but there was definitely a moment where some people wanted to cancel Liam Neeson because of his missions about the story, notwithstanding the fact that he was talking about a story that happened 40 years earlier and just reflecting on it and talking about how he was actually using his memory of that passion and rage at the time to help his acting, to help him playing a particular role in a movie. But I think it's a really interesting one because as I see it here, I totally understand the point of view of a reporter, or a person, especially a black person or a person of color in general, being scared by a story that Liam Neeson says like this, and seeing how it is sort of a pattern that a lot of white people might have in terms of racism or violent tendencies that they may not admit in themselves or see in themselves, and that it's a scary thing, and it could make people more afraid of him or more afraid of other white people like him. I totally get that. At the same time, I think there's something incredibly psychologically healthy about what Liam Neeson did in terms of being able to do the kind of introspection he did, to admit his own biases to himself, admit the things that he was feeling and thinking at that time, and to reflect on it. And really a big part of his later reflection on this was him later coming to the understanding that revenge wasn't the answer, that this wasn't really going to solve his problems and all that. So I think it's a super duper interesting story. But I also wanted to give it a preface to stories about the things that I've said in anger in private and the ways in which the Clinchies, Lola, and their allies have managed to paint a picture to so much of the rest of the Scrabble community that I am such an angry, dangerous person, that I am potentially going to be violent, and that you need to be scared of me, and that's why you need to ban me worldwide from Scrabble. And quite simply, that is absurd. I have zero history of physical violence. And I did admit in some of my writings in which I was defending myself against the incident report that I used some violent words around Lola in the private conversations we had. That was all it was. It was words. And they were not words that were directed toward her. They were directed toward other people who I was angry at. And it is the truth that I think, like, the fact that there was that tiny kernel of truth in me using a lot of these violent words and the ways it was just sort of disgustingly distorted by all of these people got so many other people afraid of me. But I really believe in a lot of ways the way I use those words and the way the truth of that matter actually is, much like it was for Liam Neeson, a sign of my own psychological health, a sign of my own psychological self-awareness, and the fact that I am somebody who looks at my own lens through how I see the world and is willing to talk about the uncomfortable things. And if anything, that makes me much less of a risk for violence than the people who just keep this shit bottled up and can't talk about it. And I'm looking at you, Evans Clinchy. I think you are one of those avoidant, cowardly fuckheads who is much more likely to snap at some point than I am because you're not comfortable enough talking about and facing and seeing your own fucking feelings. And who knows, I haven't seen you for a lot of years. It's possible you've progressed. It's possible you've gotten to a better place. But I am just so offended and appalled that you created this false story and got people to think that I might be the one to snap when you are the idiotic fuckhead who's much more likely to snap. You are the one who lost your shit in a tournament room, started jumping up and down. You are the one who has had less self-control, less self-containment, self-confidence than I have had for pretty much the entire fucking time I've known you. You know what? Not even on the subject of anger, but on the subject of like drinking too much and partying too much, there were times both in the past that both Evans and I at particular tournaments got too drunk and got really sick on a tournament day. For me, it was at 2008 Nationals. I had a horrible night before the tournament, got really, really sick. And on day one of the tournament, I was literally going to the bathroom and vomiting my guts out in the bathroom in between some rounds. And I still actually had a half-decent day of tournament Scrabble despite all of that. But it was not one of my shinier moments. But you know what? That's nothing compared to the time that Evans actually got so sick and was literally vomiting in the tournament room. Literally had a bucket and was vomiting right fucking there. Because he got much sicker than I did. There's a number of other times he got sicker at tournaments too. In fact, there's one pretty famous picture of him in Prague where he was trying to vomit into a cup at the bar but had it turned upside down, so he vomited on top of the bottom of the cup. And I know that Chris Lipe and some other people memed it later. I'm actually the person who took that picture. I took that fucking photo of you on your drunk ass vomiting on top of a cup, Evans. So, just one more point of how you are the person who can't control yourself, who can't be a fucking responsible adult. You are the person who's a shitbag who's probably gonna fucking snap at some point because you can't take an honest look at yourself. I am the person who takes a very honest look at myself, has an amazing amount of self-control. But you know what? Despite how much self-control I have, despite the fact that I've been able to contain myself and not get overly angry in the story for years, you all seem determined to push me to and past my fucking limit. You seem determined to double down, triple down, quadruple down, quintuple down on evil behavior to me for years and get me banned from Scrabble for years for reasons that have already been fucking disproven and pushing me over the edge of anger. And yes, even I, as a fucking Superman who has a lot more emotional control than you, has limits, and I can eventually be pushed to the breaking point. Are you fucking proud of yourselves for breaking me, you fuckheads? So anyway, let's talk about what I actually talked about with Lola. For one thing, I mentioned this in my stuff, when I got really angry and did violent things, it was almost never about Scrabble. It was about COVID. It was the time we were dating in that time in the very early days of COVID lockdown, where we were all sort of extremely scared about this disease and possibly dying, but we were also, a lot of us, just absolutely furious at the Trump administration and its anti-science attitude and all these crazy fucking Republicans who were denying science, who were going out and coughing on people, who were pretending COVID wasn't real. And it was the case that a lot of these people, in their just flat-out denial of reality, were endangering other people. And I found it utterly fucking disgusting. I went to great schools. I had a full scholarship to a private prep school that was a feeder for the Ivies and a bunch of other schools. I went to an Ivy League college and graduated second in my fucking class. I did my homework. I was a good student the entire time. And I'll admit it, I'm an intellectual snob. I'm an intellectual elitist. I got into games like chess and Scrabble because I wanted to play against really smart people. Because I wanted maximum intellectual challenge. I am not a populist. I never claimed to be a populist. I am an intellectual elitist. I love the intellectually elite. I want to hang out more with them. And I like them better than you dumb fucks. Okay? I am absolutely fine with my intellectual elitism. And the fact that there are so many dumb fuckheads in the world who, because of their own emotional reasons, have gotten to the point of denying science, of denying data, of denying reality. I deserve a universe, a country, a human species of people smarter than you dumb fucks. And I don't want to share a planet with a bunch of you dumb fucks who endanger my life because you are too stupid to get your fucking vaccines. So let me be fucking clear about that. That is something I have just unabashedly strong feelings about. And it's not like I'm even dealing with people who feel the other way here. You know, we're talking about Jennifer and Evans and these people. These are people who are liberals too, who also believe in science and believe that COVID is real and all that. We're not talking about a bunch of Trumpers here. Although they did turn into sort of quasi-Trumpers in a different way in terms of creating and accepting their own unreality. But that's getting a little ahead of the story here. But anyway, the point is that there were one or two times where that anger might have crossed over to talking about Scrabble players, but it was rarely, if ever, the clinchies. People I was angry at were people like Chris Lipe. And I think I've explained that many, many times and made it clear by now. But even that wasn't what usually got me saying violent and angry things. It was the fucking idiotic Trumpers. And I don't have any regrets about that. They deserve my anger. They endangered all of our fucking lives with their recklessness, with their denial of science and all that. And I really believe, you know, one of the things that I've seen in the world is that there's a whole lot of people, it's not exclusively older people, but there's a whole lot of older people in the world who've turned more and more toward Trump and this kind of movement, who I think at an earlier point in their life would have been smart enough not to fall for this bullshit. And I do think there's something to the idea that as we get older and become mentally less sharp, we become more susceptible to being mentally manipulated, to having these lies fool us. And I do think that's an example of what happened with Steve Pellin. And Steve Pellin, believe me, I was not a fan of him. I think there's certain evil, wrong things bad about him from the fucking beginning. I look back at some of his old writings from years earlier, and even though so many of you like him so much, there's a whole lot that I genuinely do not like about the guy. But there's no question that despite that, he got manipulated by the clinchies. He was dying of brain cancer and Parkinson's, and he fell for a lot of their bullshit. And he's not the only one. Not to the same degree that he did, but I had later talked with Joel Wapnick, another guy who's a former World Scrabble champion, who, you know, was the first guy ever to make it to 3 World Championship Finals and one of my idols in the game of Scrabble, a guy I know is very, very bright. And I tried to show him some of my documents, some of the stuff that I wrote on my blog, to get him to see how fucking evil the clinchies were being to me. And I had the most moronic conversation with him on Facebook Messenger, in which he admitted he believed everything the clinchies and Lola said, and he didn't believe what I was saying. Why? Because, Joel, you've lost your fucking mind. You've become a stupid fucking moron who is manipulated by these people. And I think it is sad how far your brain has fucking fallen. I mean that, Joel. It is something you should be ashamed of, how stupid and gullible you've become. And if it can happen to him, who's literally one of the brightest people, a World Scrabble champion, it can happen to anyone. And I will tell you flat out, I believe that one of the political changes I would like to see in the world is a maximum voting age. Now, I know that's a controversial position because everyone's mind degrades at different rates, but there are enough old people who become stupid, who become easily manipulated once they reach a certain age, that we really need to just say, no. Once you reach this age, you are too dumb to vote. You're not going to be around for long enough. We need younger and smarter people than you deciding who's in fucking charge. Okay, it's a little bit of a controversial position, but I think there's something to that, is that people's minds get degraded and they become more and more easily abused and fooled by manipulators and liars. And I do think, as I've said in a number of other videos, part of being a moral human being is not being a fucking sucker. You need to see the world accurately and not be fooled by liars. And if you are fooled by liars, that is your own moral failure. That is something that you are culpable for. And I fully fucking believe that. Every one of you fuckers who fell for the Clinchies manipulation, every one of you dumb shits, I blame you for being stupid enough to fall for it. At the same time, I can get a little bit of sympathy, and it goes back to that Jim Carrey quote. I've discovered the depth of deception behind those false claims, the kind of deception decent people fall for, because to us such behavior is unimaginable. And that's what it comes down to. Too many of you liked the Clinchies or Chris Light, but not you had too much emotional connection to them. You could not fathom or accept how fucking evil they actually are, how dishonest they are, how much they fucking manipulated you into abusing me. They are that fucking bad, and your refusal to see it makes you absolutely fucking disgusting human beings. And I believe that. I hate not just them, I hate every one of you faulty humans who can't see evil when it's right in fucking front of you. And I mean that about them. I mean that about my own fucking sisters. I mean, my mother's behavior was absolutely fucking appalling in what she said to me in our January 2022 conversation. And I have never even tried to pick a fight with my sisters about it and get them to change sides or anything like that. But the fact that my sisters abandoned the relationship with me and are closer to my mom when she said something that was so fucking horrendous, and they haven't come back and apologized to me and admit that she is full of shit and she is a fucking narcissist and I was right to cut her out of my life, that is their moral failure too. They are sacks of shit for not accepting how fucking evil their mother has become. And I have zero fucking problem cutting anyone out of my life if they become that fucking evil, because I'm better than you, because I understand fully that we all have a fucking moral obligation to truth more than we have an obligation to any fucking person. If your loyalty to a person is greater than your loyalty to the truth, you're becoming fucking evil. You're willing to support contrafactual cases to protect the people you like. You're willing to support evil fucking things. You are the kind of people who, if you lived in Nazi Germany, would have been good, obedient fucking Nazis. Yes, you fucking are. If you cannot see the objective fucking truth and learn to hate these fucking evil people, you are yourself falling into evil. I mean that, you dumb shits. Okay. Now, let's talk about what I really talked about with Lola. Before we get on to that, let me just say that I had a therapist I worked with a few years ago who noticed how radically high my self-control was. How I can go from 0 to 60 and then 60 back down to 0 very, very quickly. I can be not that angry, I can be really, really angry, and I can lower it down again. I have way more emotional control than most of you fuckheads. And this is the thing is, when I get angry, a lot of times it's not because I'm out of control, it's because I want to use my anger as a tool to get you to feel something, to get you to care enough to actually take action and be on the side of good, to be on the side of right. Why do I do that? Because you all have proven that you are irrational creatures. I wish I could have just written up all my stuff in the Scrabble documents in a way that was completely rational, completely devoid of emotion, completely objective, and that you would have been good enough fucking people to accept the truth that I was the victim and that the Clinchies and Lola abused me with their fucking lies and punished them. But you couldn't do that because they had activated your emotional sensors, and you hated me so much on an emotional level, you liked them on an emotional level so much that you said rationality doesn't fucking matter to you, and you're going to side with them anyway. And because you can only be persuaded by rationality, I know that what I need to get you to do is to be fucking angry at the people who fucking abused me. Now, some of you may not be capable of that, but you know what? There are other people who are capable of it, and that's who I'm speaking to. I'm not just trying to get the Scrabble world to turn against you. I'm trying to get the whole fucking world to turn against you. I want to get so many people in the world angry at the fucking manipulators and liars, angry at the people who do this dishonest defamation, and I want a massive, massive stream of hatred directly at you dumb fucks. I don't just mean Jennifer and Lola and Evans. I mean Fox News. I mean all these different sources of lying fucking news, of lying fucking propaganda. And if anything, I think that the conservatives can actually use your example as an example that they can get behind, because they can see even liberal people who are trying to uphold things like Me Too can be just as fucking evil and manipulative and lying through their fucking teeth. So I want to make an example of you to get the whole world to hate the defamers, to hate the fucking liars. And that is what you are, you scum of the fucking earth. So let's be clear about that. I said the things I said to Lola because of how fed up I was about how strong the right and its disinformation sphere had gotten, and it had gotten so many people to behave recklessly around COVID and things like that. And when I was giving this history of our text message conversations, there was this one quote I gave in there in which I said it in a joking way, but I joked about how I was a psychopath and wanted people dead and might cough on them. And the joke of it was that I might get COVID and cough and actually cause the COVID to get to them. And the idea of it was that I was joking that I was specifically going to cough on the people who were the COVID deniers and all that. And like, I worded it in a funny way at the time. Lola thought it was funny. But I will say that like the whole thing is really out of place in our text messages in terms of, it's like a big tonal shift. And I will admit that like when I reread all our text messages, and I went through like 400 pages, our entire text message history when I was preparing that response to the incident report, that particular screenshot jumped out to me. And I was like, whoa, I didn't remember saying that. Like, whoa, this is pretty shocking. It is a little scary hearing me say this, even if it's clearly a joke and all that kind of thing. But I decided I needed to include it in my document. So let's be clear about why I did that. So think about it, first off, this particular quote where I said these scary things comes nowhere close in our entire text message conversations talking about Scrabble. We were not talking about Scrabble for several pages before that or for several pages after that. This is entirely in the middle of like days of conversation where we were only talking about COVID and not about Scrabble at all. And also, that is a one-time event. There is nowhere else in the 400 pages of text messages that I said anything along those lines, anything at all about, painting myself as a psychopath who wanted to kill people or something like that. It was a completely one-time joking comment in that particular context. But why did I feel like I need to share it? Well, I believe now in retrospect that Lola had already deleted all our text messages, but I didn't know that. I thought it was entirely possible that Lola might still have our text messages on her phone. And if I wrote up this whole document to the Scrabble associations and presented the story and showed the ways in which she had deceived you about what had happened and all that, and that she was making up and lying about the entire story, she might have come back and just given this one out of context quote as a screenshot. And if she gave that one quote with me having skipped it, with me not having given it as exculpatory evidence, she could have very easily used that one little nugget to make me sound fucking insane, to make me sound fucking terrible. So I felt it was absolutely important that I put it out there myself, that I admit to it, that I contextualize it, that I get people to see the humor in it, so that it couldn't be used as a weapon against me. That is why I included that one particular quote. All right, but also, yes, there were a lot of times, especially late at night when I was trying to go to sleep, while I was living at Lola's place, that I sort of started going on soliloquies and saying a lot of angry and upsetting things. And it wasn't arguments with her. It was more sort of talking to myself. It was getting myself agitated or upset, not being able to stop talking about or thinking about certain things. And it was scary and upsetting at times, but hundreds of hours, no fucking way. When she says I was saying things for hundreds of hours, that is absolutely not the case. And I wasn't planning to kill anyone. And I wasn't, saying anything along the lines of anything about Evans or Jennifer especially. And I also want to be clear here that I don't even think this is so much the case in the time I was with Lola. But I will admit that there was a time, not necessarily when I was with her, maybe a little afterwards when all this Scrabble shit was still going on, where my anger at people in Scrabble for the way in which they had fucked up my life and created this really awkward situation and were getting me effectively blacklisted from the Pacific Northwest tournament scene and causing people to dislike me, did rise to the level at some point of homicidal thoughts and feelings about a particular Scrabble player. And I'm saying this to you like the Liam Neeson story. I'm not saying this to you at a time when I'm feeling that way. I'm saying this to you much later, admitting, yes, I did actually have homicidal feelings toward one Scrabble player at one time. And that player was Chris Lipe. It was only Chris Lipe. There was no one else in Scrabble I ever felt that way about. So let's be really fucking clear about that. Lola took this picture that I'm some fucking homicidal maniac because of shit I said about COVID people, about Republicans, about the fucking insane people there. Maybe a few offhand mentions in moments of anger about stuff about Scrabble, but nothing that was ever really directed toward the Clinchies at all. If I did say anything that angry, it was about Chris Lipe, not anyone else. And you know what? Lola falsely painted this as I'm saying these homicidal things about the Clinchies. Why did she falsely paint it that way? Because she knew they would believe it. She knew what they wanted to hear. And that's what it comes down to. These people are fucking narcissists. They think my life is all about them. They can't accept that they just aren't that fucking important to me. Even when I did get to the level of being that fucking angry at a person, it wasn't about you, it was about someone else. Because you are so fucking unimportant in this story. And I want to say that's especially true of you, Evans. There was a long period of time where this story was only being perpetuated by your anger. Where Jennifer and I could have worked shit out and just become peaceable at tournaments if you hadn't decided you hated me for years after that early 2017 incident. But you know what? You carried the hatred on long enough, you influenced her and other people, and you all eventually got caught up in the tidal wave, but you by yourself didn't really fucking do anything. In fact, the statement you made was only a tiny drop in the bucket and probably didn't even affect anything in terms of the actual hearings against me. The only reason the hearings against me were successful and I got banned from Scrabble was because of the words of Jennifer and the words of Lola. Whether your words were there was fucking irrelevant because nobody cares about what a fucking weak male like you thinks about me. And what a fucking stupid coward you are who is acting like a woman, doing all this backstabbing, talking behind people's backs, being a complete fucking pussy. That's what you are. And that's the thing, is that, like, I'm just amused in some ways at how unimportant Evans is to the whole fucking story, despite his desire to be important. Anyway. Dig Deep Daily, as the mug says. This is actually from my local jazz station, KMHD. And they just had a nice birthday broadcast because yesterday was Miles Davis's 100th birthday. So I got to listen to tons of Miles Davis on the radio yesterday, which was really nice. Also, the day before, actually, Sonny Rollins just died at 95. So a moment to honor both of those guys, both great jazz musicians whose music I've listened to a lot. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so let's talk about it. So yeah, I said a few angry things when I was with Lola. It wasn't generally directed toward the Clinchies at all. And it wasn't even about the Darrell Day shit either. That's the other thing, is that like the time where I was angry about Darrell Day was really before I moved in with Lola, when this NASPA incident thing had been brought to me. And I did like once or twice mention it in these kind of bedroom soliloquies while I was upset about other things. But it was never anything that was like a big bone of contention that actually got Lola all that angry or upset, or that we even spent much time talking about, we never argued about at all. And the funny thing about that is that that's actually kind of obvious and true if you look back at Lola's documents closely. One of the things I actually love about the way they tied this whole Darrell Day incident thing into this is it's actually a lot of evidence of how absolutely malicious and dishonest these people were. So first off, Jennifer and Evans didn't even know about this Darrell Day incident. It was something that they only found out about it years after the fact. So what happened was, in this early April time, which was when Lola and I had just made a trip to Puerto Rico, but before we were living together, I got this incident report because of something I had said online to Darrell Day. And I want to contextualize this a little bit. This wasn't about Scrabble at all. It wasn't a conversation that was on a Scrabble group or anything like that. It was actually on one of Cesar del Solar's Facebook posts that was not about Scrabble, but about politics. And it was the case that Darrell Day is a guy I barely know. He's a player from Texas who's, not surprisingly, he's a Republican, but like I had only met him a few times years earlier at tournaments, and we was going along just fine. Like he was a gentlemanly guy. We played pleasant games together. We played a few times, but like someone I barely had any interaction with in the Scrabble world. But during that 2020 time, when Trump had already gotten elected, been president for the better part of 4 years, and then COVID lockdowns were happening and all this, I think he, like a lot of other people, kind of snapped and went deep down this Trump rabbit hole and just became this obnoxious extreme right-winger who was picking fights left and right online. And he was doing it in a very uncivil, very nasty way. And this wasn't a one-time thing. He was doing this over and over and over again. And in particular, it was the case that my friend Cesar had a tendency for making a lot of political posts that were in some ways sort of, traps or trolling some of these right-wingers and egging them on. And at the same time, there were a lot of his and my left-leaning friends who often like to talk and have some good conversations on these posts. But Darrell Day was a person who kept butting in and giving really nasty retorts and being extremely mean to people and just saying unhinged shit that was so far removed from reality, so far removed from any sort of rational discourse. And it was clear that he was like, his brain had become fried, and he was this hater of Democrats, he was this hater of AOC in particular, and just being completely uncivil and nasty in these conversations. And he had pissed not just me off, but many other people in the Scrabble community or just Staters community of friends off by just derailing what could have been positive conversations between pretty like-minded left-wing people to just make fun of us and drag things into the fucking gutters. And when I replied to him in the way that I did, it wasn't even like a first-time thing. This was only after he'd spoken up a bunch of times on a bunch of different posts and been a really obnoxious person. And I'll tell you that the way I spoke up, I said some pretty violent, nasty things to him. They were so cartoonish and exaggerated. I would hope that anyone could think there was no way that this is actually being literal. I was just trying to gross him out. I was being like The Aristocrats, that movie about like the really crude comedian joke, yelling at him like diarrhea in his mouth and stuff like that. Just using like extremely gross metaphors to just sort of freeze him in his tracks and get him to shut the fuck up. And I did this out of a feeling of protecting my friend Cesar, because I thought of it as this post is in his home. It's on his wall, it's on his post, and he's trying to have a nice conversation with a bunch of his left-leaning friends, and this guy keeps cutting into my friend's space and disrespecting him. And literally, the way he started that particular conversation that finally made me speak up, the very first thing he did when he cut into that conversation was say that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, had an IQ of 10. Right? This was not an escalation from someone else. This was not a continuation of a different argument. This was him first butting into this conversation in this way with this preposterous claim that AOC has an IQ of 10. So that's the kind of intelligent discourse he was bringing to the thing. Now you can say my expression of violent words was over the top there and was uncalled for. I will also say that the only person who should be the judge of that is either Cesar, because it's his wall, his post, or Facebook and their moderators. Facebook owns the website, and if they decide that's not speech they want to have on there, they have the right to take those posts down too. But the only people who should be making judgments about whether I said something appropriate or inappropriate in that post and whether it should be taken down are Cesar himself or Facebook, not any of the Scrabble associations. And quite simply, the Scrabble associations had zero fucking business trying to put any punishment on me or have any hearing about something that wasn't even about Scrabble tournaments, wasn't a Scrabble group, it was just Cesar's private Facebook post. And also I want to be clear here that, okay, yeah, I wasn't very nice, but I'm not sorry at all for what I said. I never will be sorry for what I said to Darrell Day at that point. The fact that Darrell Day had already lost his fucking mind. He'd become completely irrational, completely gross, completely attacking of my friend in my friend's own space. Now, I understand what Cesar said to me afterwards. It's his place to police that. If he doesn't want Darrell Day to say something, he'll say something about it. He'll delete the post. He'll take down the stuff. And I respect that. Yes, Cesar's right. He's the one who's been policing that, not me. So maybe I overstepped in terms of that. I have no problem at all that Cesar spoke up to me and said, don't do that, let me handle it. That is perfectly appropriate. It is not appropriate for the Scrabble associations to get out of their fucking lane and start bowling in Cesar's lane of his Facebook post. So it was never something the Scrabble Association should have deigned to police in the first fucking place. And the fact that you all did is because you disgustingly overstepped against me because you're scared and you want to control someone whose emotion you can't fucking handle. I don't give a fuck about your feelings about that. You don't get to police my posts on my friend's Facebook post, you dumb fucks. The other thing is that I believe that this is how the sausage is made. is that dumb fuckheads like Darrell Day, who are so far removed from rationality, there is no rational way of talking them out of an argument like that. There is no way of getting them to back down and stop being the disgusting, invasive fuckheads they are, who are attacking my friend Cesar and his friends on their post and derailing what otherwise could have been a very erudite and interesting conversation among a bunch of like-minded liberals. Quite simply, he was so far unhinged, I knew that the only way to get him to shut the fuck up was to get at that unhinged brain. To say something that would emotionally affect him and scare him and get him to back the fuck off. And you know what? It worked. As soon as I made that fucking post, it had the desired goal of getting Darrell Day to shut the fuck up and not make any more comments on that post. And no one else was succeeded in getting him to shut the fuck up and get the hell out of that conversation. I'm the only one who was brave enough to do the thing that was actually necessary to get him to shut the fuck up, and I'm a hero for it. I protected Cesar and his friends. I protected the sanctity of that fucking conversation, you dumb fucks. And you know what? That whole thing was only up for a few minutes. And it was deleted so quickly thereafter. Cesar decided to take the whole post down. And even when Darrell made a complaint about it to, to NASPA, he didn't even have screenshots of it. Because the whole thing was so fucking short-lived. It was only up there for a minute or two. Right? But you know what happened? In that time that it was up there, Seth Lipkin took screenshots of that. Now, Seth Lipkin, I will tell you, is a guy I don't personally like very much. I think he probably feels the same way. Seth and I don't get along great. We're not personal friends these days. We were maybe years ago, but whatever. But I also want to be clear that even though I don't really like Seth, I respect him a lot. I have the utmost respect for Seth as a computer programmer, as someone who's given a lot to the Scrabble community in terms of using the Ulu app and building the Ulu app and building the Cross Tables website. And I respect his contributions to the community a lot. And I've even talked to him in helpful ways. I've given him feedback when I've seen there were bugs in the app or the website or something like that and tried to help him debug particular issues when they came up. So I am very grateful for Seth's contributions to society, even if we're not, to the Scrabble community, even if we're not personally the best of friends. But honestly, what Seth did was really mean-spirited toward me. He got a hold of these fucking screenshots and he delivered them to NASPA to help in this crusade against me based on this particular thing. And in fact, he is the person who later gave those screenshots to Lola and got her really angry at me at the time that we broke up. So the thing is that all of this stuff that I said is something that would have just like disappeared from the internet in 2 minutes, and nobody would have even remembered it, and the Clintons would have never even known about it if not for Seth keeping it alive. So Seth kept it alive with those particular screenshots. And then you know what? Even with Seth keeping it alive, the Clintons didn't know about any of this shit until 2 years afterwards. And then you know what happened? Lola first wrote her letter to Jennifer and told her about, her concerns about me. She didn't even mention Darrell Day in her first letter at all. And then the second letter, the one that actually became part of the NASPA incident report, she actually only mentioned Darrell Day in a parenthetical. And the way she mentioned it in the parenthetical wasn't even expressing any anger or upset about me and my behavior toward Darrell Day. It was completely just saying that, for comparison's sake, like Dave said these nasty, mean, angry things, like some of you might know about this thing he said about Darrell Day for comparisons, like things of that nature. So he's using it simply as a point of comparison of a time when I had shot my mouth off using violent imagery. But it was not from a point of view of her actually being concerned about the Darrell Day stuff or complaining about it at all. So that was her first two letters. No mention at all of Darrell Day, and then just this parenthetical, completely emotionally neutral thing. But it's because she made this parenthetical, completely neutral emotional thing that she mentioned the Darrell Day thing. And then what happened? Jennifer and Evans went and said, what is this Darrell Day thing? They went and got the screenshots of this thing from 2 years earlier. And then if you read their two documents, which were written after this stuff, but before the September 9th statements, they went ballistic. They started quoting the Darrell Day thing over and 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 over again. And that's what it is. It's like, we found the silver bullet. We found the proof that David's a horrible person. And even though it's something that she just mentioned once and didn't have any emotion tied up in, and it was on the internet for 2 minutes, and it wouldn't even still be around if not for the fact that Seth Lipkin had preserved the screenshots, we're going to make this the entire centerpiece of our attack on Dave and get the entire fucking world to hate him on this fucking basis. Because that's the kind of disgusting hate mongers you are. You wanted to destroy my fucking life, you wanted to blow this one thing out of proportion and do it to completely destroy my life, and because of that, your lives are going to be destroyed because everyone's going to see the truth of what immoral, hate mongering fuckheads you are. so let's be clear about that. They are hate-mongering fuckheads. They used this one little pill, and it wasn't even something that was particularly upsetting to Lola. But then what did Lola do? After they wrote all this other fucking stuff, where they went ballistic about the Darrell Day stuff, which should have been completely irrelevant to the story of me and the Clinchies and Lola, especially because they didn't even know about it until 2 years after. They didn't know about it at all until this parenthetical mention. So then, after this, I gave my whole incident report to the Scrabble associations and pointed out all of the fucking lies, all of the ways in which Jennifer, Lola, and Evans had just lied through their fucking teeth, put intentionally false defamatory stuff in print to try to ruin my fucking life. And then what happens? After I completely prove they're lying, defaming fuckheads, and they have no defense to all their other shit, then Lola goes ballistic talking about the Darrell Day stuff in her third letter when she had never fucking cared about it before. It's so fucking obvious if you read the progression of these letters that literally the Darrell Day thing was practically a non-fucking issue to Lola in the first 2 letters, and she only made it an issue because the Clinchies made it a big issue, and the reason they all made it a big issue was because the only thing they could do is take out this completely irrelevant thing to try to malign my name, get people to hate me and be afraid of me, because the actual story of what happened between me and the Clinchies and Lola, they are the abusers and I am the victim, and they don't have a fucking leg to stand on. And you fuckers fell for it. And the way you, John Chu, used that Darrell Day stuff in your excuse of why you fucking suspended me, which, keep in mind, you didn't give me until a year after you actually fucking suspended me. The fact that you chose to make a big deal about the Darrell Day thing then shows that you were just as dishonest, a defaming fuckhead. You didn't have a good story of anything I had done wrong to the Clinchies or Lola, so you had to bring up this Darrell Day thing for the same reason they did, to get the whole world to hate me on an emotional basis that was not at all connected to who was right and who was wrong in the story between me and the Clinchies, between me and Lola, because you too are a defaming fuckhead. That's all I have to say about that.